My goals for the chapter were to explain, a lot of people go into public policy making with the Bismarck idea that laws are best understood if you don't see them being made. And I guess I disagree with that. And so my goal for the chapter really is to explain how I think that the communication and the selling of ideas in the public policy arena in particular are legitimate, are part of, and in fact integral and essential to the effective functioning of our government and our society. And therefore it's very important that we have confidence that what we're doing isn't something that's backroom and slimy or something that is, you could actually talk to your your preacher and your family about and not be embarrassed because it does in fact add value to the equation. And I came to that after a career now, I've just retired, of over 35 years in association work, and before that about 10 years working in government. I started working for the governor of Wisconsin, writing speeches, traveling around, seeing how a governor operates and gaining a great appreciation for the strength of character that he had and therefore introduced to it in a nice way. Went to work for a couple congressmen in Washington, both of whom I thought were men of high character who were dealing with issues in a responsible way. And so when I left the Hill and went downtown in Washington to work for a couple associations, and really over those 35 years, it's only been 2 associations. So I worked first for the National Solid Waste Management Association, which is now called the Environmental Industries Association. In fact, one of my first things when I got there was, we shouldn't be calling it the National Solid Waste Management Association because we're broader than that, both nationally, we're international, and we deal with more than solid waste. So, but I never could get that done. It's been done now. And then I went to the Salt Institute as a CEO, but a small association, so it was hands-on. And one of the functions that I served from the beginning in my work in the governor's office and the congressional offices, well, I dealt with on the Hill with drafting and trying to pass legislation, which as a minority staff was not going to happen. But when I got downtown, I was also dealing with the public policy, with making laws and everything like that. But it's the broader question of communication and the broader question within communication of what should be the message, who should be the audience, and just trying to understand that, because a lot of people who get in real trouble around here don't do it because they lie and cheat and tell falsehoods or half-truths, which destroys you completely, but because they don't know who to communicate with and they don't know how to fashion a winning message. And a winning message, it seems to me, is one which identifies your interest with the public interest. And therefore it is a legitimate part of the policy process. There are a number of things. When I worked for National Solid Waste Management Association, for example, we had a problem where operators of landfills and hazardous waste, chemical waste facilities couldn't get insurance for their facility because who knew what kind of environmental liabilities might be inherent in putting this stuff in the ground that 50 years later might become the next Love Canal or something. So they just couldn't get it insured. We came up with the concept of a post-closure liability fund where a fee would be paid at the time of disposal, and a facility which was closed properly according to all the plan would then have the liability shifted from the owner to this fund that had been created by disposal fees. So it would front load sort of the way Social Security was supposed to be, not a Ponzi scheme, but front loaded, pay as you go. And the idea would be that the costs would be passed back to the manufacturer who generated the industrial waste, and it would therefore be charged to customers at the real time. That was enacted in 1980, and it was enacted because we could tell the public, this isn't just to shield our industry from a problem of getting insurance, it's to make sure that you have someone to pay for this, because at that time Superfund was being enacted, and it was being enacted because people had walked away from their responsibilities and there was nobody there. And so what were you going to do? So this was an example of that. The other things that we've done have been to try to convince the association to take a more proactive, broader view of the world. Now, associations, unlike companies, all of them have interests. All of them can be affected by public policy, and all of them would be well advised to consider a communications strategy. But associations seems to be necessarily, they're often unions of competitors. Other associations may represent people who are allied on one issue but have much broader issues. They may be allied in some political issue, but they have family issues, they have industrial issues, and everything that's in their life that also does. An association executive and an association communications program leader, therefore, need to be sensitive to the myriad influences that are affecting association policy. For example, as CEO of the SALT Institute, we had a very large international component. So one of the things I had to do is balance the domestic concerns of U.S. and actually U.S. and Canadian were equated companies with those from China and from Europe and elsewhere in the world who had the same industry, were trying to produce salt and sell it to people so they could use it for all the uses of salt. But because they were coming from a different country and everything, they had different interests. So you have to be politically sensitive in a way that perhaps a corporate communications person, he can wait for what the CEO says and then go to town. You've got to be a lot more sensitive on some of these issues. Well, one of the things that, one of our issues, for example, in salt, was to promote the use of road salt to keep roads safe in winter. Well, for years, for 50 years, we've known that road salt works and it makes the roads safer. We've also known that if you put it in the environment, plants die, waters get polluted, and this is not a good thing. So how do you design a win-win? And that's what you have to look for. Well, it seems to me you have to minimize the damage that's being done. That's a win for the environment and therefore a win for a long-term commitment to using salt. And you have to win by promoting a use of salt that does in fact reduce traffic crashes and does in fact ensure winter mobility so people can have jobs to go to. If you don't have a factory that can get its workers to work, that gets the raw product out, that can ship the finished product, then it shuts down. And we had several issues in Canada, and I kept saying to them, you know, you got to have a winter maintenance program of some sort or your country goes away, because it can't shut down for 6 months of the year and survive. People just can't do that. So we've dealt with that in several ways, and before I got to the SALT Institute, my predecessor had actually won a silver anvil for a program called sensible salting. And the idea was to use the minimum amount of salt at the right place at the right time. Tremendous. No message needed to be done. So what we added to that, though, was who you're going to send that message to. We were training our customers on how to put down the minimum amount. And over a period of time, we then sponsored research that showed that the newer uses, the newer techniques, the newer technologies that were being used, that we were promoting, were reducing the environmental impact of the salt. So we were getting the win. Then we also sponsored a study done by the Marquette University Civil Engineering Department, former Public Works Director in the city of Milwaukee, who studied in 4 states the impact on traffic crashes and injuries, and found that when you put salt down, within the next several hours, you cut crashes by 88% and injuries even more. So it's the safety argument, which is a very compelling argument. You know, it's one thing to say, we want to save your money, but if you tell a parent that the school bus his kid went off to school this morning is in the ditch somewhere, you got a very unhappy parent. And then the other thing we sponsored was some legislation that shows, as these blizzards come through and they immobilize whole metropolitan areas, huge economic loss. We sponsored research done by Standard & Poor's DRI that's evolved to several other companies that showed what the actual loss is. And it turns out that a single day's losses in for immobility based on not taking care of the streets would cost more than the snow fighting for that community for the entire year. Then you have to say, well, what else can we do? Well, our job was to promote the use of salt. Well, why? Because people can use salt. There are 14,000 different uses of salt. So we were trying to find out which consumer should get which message about how to take advantage of this. And so one of the things that we did was we said, if de-icing works pretty well in Buffalo, New York, it probably works in Atlanta and Little Rock as well, and Dallas. And it does, but it's a different weather pattern. So you have a different audience with different expectations for budget outlays. I mean, they're going to buy the big plows that they use in Buffalo, New York. In Dallas, what they need there is what might be a converted liquid fertilizer truck that during the winter could be used to spray salt water out on the freeways. And that's what we've done. So we've expanded the market very much using that. Communications is used in all of these things because the public policy process, it should be more than just a reaction to crises. It should be more than an association saying, oh my goodness, some congressman just introduced a bill, or some state legislature or legislative or regulatory agency just put in something that we just can't live with. So you've got to be sensitive to what the problems are that people might be experiencing with the use of your product, and then design a solution for that. So again, win-win, but much further upstream. I do think it's a good career choice. I think that associations do a lot of good, and it doesn't have to be a do-gooder association. I mean, the Salvation Army is a wonderful association. The Red Cross, I give blood to the Red Cross all the time. But you don't have to do that. You're adding a legitimate input to improving public policy for the whole economy and our whole society if you work for an association that promotes a narrow industrial interest or a particular political viewpoint. You're adding to the quality of the debate. I had a call once on the phone in the office from Gene Weingarten, who you may not know, but is the humorist for the Washington Post. And he started off by saying, I wanted to do a column on associations, and I looked, and there are thousands of associations, and they deal with the most minute, irrelevant things, and so I've chosen you to interview. And so we had about a 15-minute conversation, the transcript of which became his column. And it was just an opportunity. People would come up to me in church the following Sunday, and they said, I read your thing in the paper, and thank you very much, because I'm in an association, and you've laid it out, and which is what I've just said to you.